for people. And take it away, Brooke.
Awesome. So this is our at MADD, our Power of Parents program, and we're really the reason that we do these kinds of programs at MADD is to support our mission, right, and to work towards our mission of no more victims. And at Mothers Against Drunk Driving, our kind of four-part mission is to end drunk driving, help fight drugged driving, prevent underage drinking, and then support the victims of all these violent crimes, right? So we're here for one of those pieces, right? To prevent underage drinking. And how that fits in is that we know the younger somebody starts drinking, the more likely they are to become a drunk driver, an impaired driver, or get into a car with somebody who is or is impaired in that moment, which obviously we want to deter as our main mission is to prevent underage drinking, right? So these are kind of our three programs that we have to support that. And you're going to see one of them today. The other two are for elementary, middle, and high schoolers on educating them around these topics, which is really cool as well. And at MADD, we start or end, depending on the program, with a mission moment. And this presentation starts off with Olivia Pruitt's story, and I'm going to read it from her mother's point of view. So I'm going to be looking at my screen over here to read her story, as told by her mother, Lisa. My daughter, Olivia, didn't wake up one day desiring to be an alcoholic, an addict, and lose her life at 21. That came about from the friends and choices she made. Olivia took her first drink around age 13. Looking back, there were signs. Her friends changed in middle school. Her diaries talk about how badly she wanted to fit in. I once dropped her off at a friend's house, and when I returned, she was so intoxicated with alcohol poisoning that we went straight to the emergency room. Drinking caused Olivia to lose her virginity just before the 8th grade to a high school senior. Then she was so ashamed she drank more and tried to take her own life. Counseling helped for a while, but if she took one sip, she just couldn't stop. Olivia was a repeat offender. She got arrested, did drugs, wrecked a car, and became involved in an abusive relationship. Despite all the bad things, she still graduated early from high school with wonderful grades. When she wasn't under the influence, she was sweet and charming and funny. At age 21, Olivia called and asked for help. We got her waitlisted at an inpatient treatment program. She was supposed to call daily to check for an opening, but Olivia stopped calling, thinking she could handle it on her own. 3 months later, she drove drunk, hit an embankment, and died the next day. Later, I learned that the parents of Olivia's closest middle school friends allowed kids to drink at home as long as no one was driving. I had no idea. I trusted other parents and put my head in the sand. I never wanted to believe that my daughter had a drinking problem or was less than perfect. Losing Olivia changed our family forever. The simplest things in life, just like setting the table, became a monumental event. I share her story because if one person chooses not to go down that same path, then Olivia's life and death have purpose, and that gives me comfort. So Olivia and countless others have lost their lives as a result of underage drinking, right? 4,300 teens every year die because of this. And as we'll go through the program, we know it's not just from cars, right? So there's so many other dangers when it comes to alcohol underage. So today's key objectives are to really talk about the problem and consequences of underage drinking and marijuana use, to kind of discredit some of the misconceptions that are in our society, as well as the role of teens and their friends and peers, adults, parents, and then what, as the parent, guardian, older sibling, you can do for that person. So, as I'm sure a lot of us know, alcohol is a drug and is the number one drug of choice for youth, right? It's easily accessible. It's seen as normal in our society, right? And as I said, teen alcohol use kills more than 4,300 teens every year. And kids who start drinking young are 7 times more likely to be an alcohol-related crash, which is huge, right? And not just that, but it's important to remember kind of the age that, I think it was on this slide actually. Yeah, the age that your child and just children in general are starting to think about alcohol, and they actually start weighing the pros and cons at age 8. So it's not unnormal for your teen, or for your 8-year-old, I should say, to start asking questions and for you to start answering those questions and having those conversations even as early as that age. So taking away the keys doesn't take away the risk, right? And Olivia's story talked about how she was concerned about, wasn't her friend's parents, right, weren't concerned about the drinking as long as nobody was driving, right? But in middle school, who's really driving? So obviously they thought there were no other risks. But in reality, there are so many other things that happen and can happen relating to underage drinking, right? Homicides, suicides, drownings, fires, falls, alcohol poisoning, things like that. So just because you're not driving doesn't mean alcohol is always 100% safe. So these are some local statistics here in Connecticut. And the first bullet is really just showing how we are above the national average in 12 to 20-year-olds who have consumed alcohol in the month prior to taking a survey, right? So we're above average in a lot of things. We're above average in alcohol impaired driving crashes as well. There's a lot of things related to alcohol that we are above average on, which is obviously why we're here today, to kind of bring down that number. But something to note is in the bottom, how a lot has kind of changed since from 2019 to 2021. So 10% of high school students had consumed alcohol, where in 2021, where in 2019 it was only 11.7. So it's gone down a little bit, which is obviously a good thing. And then 7% of students said they had binge drank, which is 4 or more drinks for females and 5 or more for males in one sitting. However, in the last 30 days, compared to 12.9% in 2019. So that's a drastic change, right? But obviously there's a lot that goes into that. COVID was happening. There's all these things. So I'm obviously eager to see what this year's survey might tell later, right? And see if that number stays hopefully at 7 or goes down even more, which would be really nice.
Hey, Brooke, can I jump in on that for a sec? Just because in
Yeah.
Norwalk, we did survey this year in 2022. And then in Norwalk and Westport, we surveyed in like about 18 months prior in 2021. And, you know, what we're seeing here in Norwalk and the like national trend really is that kids are drinking and drugging less. Like it's been a long, slow decline, but kids are using substances a lot less than they used to, which is great. And it seems like we're at kind of maybe a low percent of kids who are using substances in high school. So if we can keep it there and not have it go, like, I mean, of course, a lot of it is the impact of COVID, and some of that trend seems to have started before COVID. But if we could keep it here, that'd be such a great preventive strategy.
Yes, absolutely. One of the main ways that teens understand why it's so dangerous to consume, and hopefully maybe this is even contributing to the factor that they're doing it less, is that their brain is very much impacted by consuming these substances, right? And they really get that. They get that it's a physical thing, that it's tangible. They can understand that. Oopsies, keep breaking the button. Our brain just isn't done developing until we're 25, right? So even before we're 21 and legally can drink alcohol, our brain isn't quite developed. And that square there is where our executive functions are housed, our ability to think outside the box, make good decisions, our judgment is all housed there. And it's not really developed until even after we're 21. But especially before we're 21, those judgment skills just aren't there. So showing the teens that um, putting that substance in your body that's going to make you make poor choices, even more so than you already do because your brain's just not developed, really clicks with them. So teaching them this, showing them a graph like this, showing them their brain and reminding them that, um, and reminding yourself that teens make poor choices because their brains aren't really developed. And it's dangerous to add substances into your body um, that hinder your ability to make good choices when you already don't necessarily make the greatest choices sometimes, or you have to think a little harder to make those choices, right? So, what are the role of friends and peers in a teen's choice to drink? Middle and high schoolers tend to overestimate how many teens drink alcohol and how much alcohol is consumed by their friends and peers. They think that everybody's doing it when in reality, the majority of teens aren't, right? Um, so, reminding them of that. But also, I think we'll talk about this in a second, reminding yourself that um, there are still teens who are doing it, right? As parents, parents lowball that number. So, remembering that too. Um, Teens also realize that they've seen their friends do it and they're like, oh, nothing happened to them, so nothing's going to happen to me, right? But it's obviously always um, something can always go wrong, right? So, what about just the other adults in your teen's life, right? It's a special occasion. I drank when I was a teenager and I turned out okay. Letting my teen drink at home takes away the mystery and decreases um, his desire to drink. So these are all some misconceptions that adults have. So even those in Olivia's story, the adults had those misconceptions. They also have misconceptions about this European myth, right? That kids in Europe drink far less than American youth because they are allowed to drink at a much younger age. And you can see from this chart that many um, European countries have far more problems with binge drinking than we do here in the United States, which obviously binge drinking leads to much more consequences in the moment and later in life when teens are doing that action. So the decades worth of research consistently proves that children and teens that are permitted to drink in the home, even in really small amounts, um, do this outside of the home, drink more often, and have more problems. And it's really important to realize that you can't teach your child how to drink responsibly. You're not going to, there's no other drug that you will um, teach your child how to use, right? Cocaine, even cannabis, whatever it is, you're not going to do that. So, what can you do? How can you talk about this with your middle schooler, with your high schooler? And one of the ways that we have come up to do that is by creating this handbook. And we're going to go through a little bit about what's in this handbook. And at the end, um, there'll be either you can go to this link here, madd.org/power of parents, and all of the links are online. Or at the end, I believe there's a QR code for it as well. But we're going to go into a little bit about what is in that in the books and each topic that's in it. So one of the topics is kind of showing and reminding parents, guardians, whoever's reading the book, that how your middle high schooler is viewing the world. Teens think in the here and now, right? Those long-term reasoning skills aren't quite honed yet. They desire freedom and independence and responsibility. However, they still need your care, right? And your reminders. They encounter new moral develops or dilemmas about risky behaviors, alcohol, cannabis, and other drugs all the time. And your role is really there to help them um, and remind them to use those skills that they are capable of doing. They just need a reminder on how to use them. So, the next topic in the book is about what type of parent are you? And this isn't to say one is better than the other. This research that was done to see which parenting style worked for deterrence of drinking alcohol, right? So the authoritarian parent gives orders, it's my way or the highway. The overprotective parent stays in control. Um, The parent rushes in and teens do not face consequences or action of their actions. Permissive rule setting, parent gives in, just says, oh, kids will be kids. And then the positive or authoritative parent uses their authority to strengthen and protect, but not control the teen, and builds trust and teaches teens how to make decisions, right? So the um, the two that seem the most impact on drinking decisions. So a parent who um, I always get them mixed up, so I have to read it so that I say the right words, because authoritative and authoritarian sound very similar. Teens of authoritarian parents tend to consume the most dangerously high levels of alcohol, while teens of positive/authoritative parents, if they do drink illegally, consume significantly less alcohol than teens of other parenting styles. So we recognize that you know your child, right? You know who you're talking to, and there are obviously things that work for every parent and every family and every child. But in this instance, in this research, this is what it has shown. And you can scan that little QR code thing there, and it's also in the book at the end, to see what kind of parenting style you are, and see what it is that maybe you want to change or what's working for you, and see what it means. So then in this book, we have techniques for talking about alcohol, knowing how to communicate family values and the consequences, and then handling your own, like what you did as a teen, right? And your kids' questions about how you handled this peer pressure situations, or if you did drink underage, whatever it is. And one of the techniques that we try to make sure that everybody knows about is just starting that conversation. Because once that kind of piece is done out of the way, you're able to bring it up more, and the taboo-ness of it kind of goes away, right? So simply starting where you are today. Many times this kind of conversation happens over long stretches of time, right? It's not just one big conversation, it's just many tiny conversations along the years. Start with how, what, and why questions, because they can encourage conversation, right? And open-endedness in the discussion, and have your child think about more of what they're going to say, right? Get into the habit of asking permission to ask questions, so that you work together to solve these problems, instead of the conversation just being a lecture from you, right? You want this to be a conversation, not a lecture. If you have to, just drop the conversation, pick it up another time if they're not in the mood right then. You don't want this to feel like a punishment. And talk a lot, and talk every day. Talk about things that matter to your teen. So not just about these topics, right? Talk about anything that they really love to talk about. This makes conversations that might be heavier, like alcohol, cannabis, feel easier to participate in, right? Because you talk about other things all the time. So what's one more topic to add into that conversation? And then, as I said, seek discussion and not lecture. So share your own experiences and make sure that it's not a one-sided conversation. So the most important part is starting the conversation, right? But then it's also important to help your teen make those good choices. So in this part of the book, you get some tips for dealing with peer pressure, finding alternatives to drinking, guiding them to kind of choose their friends wisely, also setting clear expectations, rules, and consequences. So if your teen does go to a party and ends up consuming alcohol, they know what their consequence is when they did that. So they feel much more comfortable calling and saying, I did this, can you come get me? Because they aren't scared of what you might say to them, of what their punishment might be, right? There's no secrets there. It's all out in the open. And then there's also some tips about getting help when teenagers do have a drinking problem. So this is a piece that we recently added into this presentation, and I think it's really important. So in 2020, February of 2020, MADD started or did a national study to understand public attitudes about awareness of driving under the influence of marijuana, right? And what conversations are being had about that. So again, I need to look at the results because there's so many numbers on the screen. I need to read it. So as you can see in this chart, just over 50% of parents and grandparents surveyed said that they discussed the consequence of driving after recently consuming alcohol with their teens, sometimes and often, compared to the startling 60% of parents and grandparents who said that they discussed the consequences of driving after recently consuming marijuana rarely or never. So the results of this survey reinforce the importance of parents and caregivers to have the intentional and ongoing conversations, not just about drinking under the influence or driving under the influence of alcohol, right? But also marijuana too. And it shows the misconceptions that our society has about driving under the influence of marijuana, right? Or getting into a car with somebody who is under the influence of marijuana. So not only having conversations of not participating in these activities, but also having conversations about finding a safe way home, that they can call you, that they can call so-and-so, whatever it is, to get home safely and not get to that car if they are and have consumed any substance, or if they know that their safe ride home is no longer a safe ride home.
Brooke, you said that was a national survey?
Yes, it was. I think it had more specific areas, but yeah, it was Texas, Florida, Missouri, like a bunch of different places around the country got the specific study. I can send you everybody the whole, it's a, what do they call it? A national study it's our parent teen kind of national survey they did. And there's a whole bunch of information in there that I can send you guys.
Thank you. It'd be interesting to see how like what the percentage change in the conversations for like states where marijuana was legal. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
The other thing I was just noticing is on that slide, Brooke, it says whether people had discussed, like, under the title, it says frequency of discussing driving within 2 hours of consuming. But what I think the vast majority of people have no idea is that you shouldn't drive for 6 hours after consuming marijuana products. And if it was an edible, you shouldn't drive for 8 hours. And so we really have to have different guidelines around that. And most adults have no idea that those are the guidelines. So,
no. It's so hard to give numbers for that stuff for people to even, they hear so many different things and then they're like, well, nobody knows anything. So
right. And so then they don't want to talk about it. Yeah.
So going off of that, we added in more recently, the last couple of years, talking about cannabis and combining alcohol and cannabis as well. Because there is a huge difference in the cannabis today than it was 30, 40 years ago. It's obviously dangerous to the developing brain. And studies have shown that affects the marijuana brain. Using marijuana chronically, right, the brain is very smart, but there can be long-term consequences if not stopped, right? And then there are some debunking the myths about marijuana. So one of them is on the screen, that it's safer than alcohol because it's not addictive, where that's not true, right? We know that it can be addictive. While it may look different than alcohol addiction, a heroin addiction may look different for you and your neighbor and your mom and your whoever, but it is still and can be addictive to people, especially as it stays in your system much longer. A lot of people just don't realize how dangerous it can be and how addictive it really can be. So those are kind of the main points of the book. And the main point of this program is really to give some detail on the consequences to physically, right, to our bodies as teens when we consume alcohol. And then to give those kind of short little overview of what's in this handbook, to encourage you to read the handbook yourself and see what it is that you need to do for your family and for your teen, your sibling, your little cousin, whoever it is that needs to hear this conversation. So reading the book is really the best way to get even more detail. So teens are listening, right? What are you saying? Making sure that you're being that positive influence on them, and just having conversations about anything with them, because they do want to talk, right? Teen or parents in general, guardians have the biggest influence on their teen's choice to drink. So that is that. If you care to, it would be great if you could scan and take our post-program survey. That would be fantastic. And then I'll put the link to the handbook in the chat right now so that you can click on it directly.
I'm talking, but I forgot to unmute myself. I think the handbook is terrific, Brooke. I think the content in there is great. And I don't know if you saw that Donna was just commenting in the chat that she's been lucky with her son, who's in college and has told her all these sad stories about his friends and college kids, but she's like really trying to think about her daughter who's going into middle school. And yeah, I mean, Donna, because I have a kid who's college age and one who's a senior in high school, and like what everyone has access to now is so different. Like, I mean, just vaping that didn't even used to exist. I've been finding vapes like everywhere recently. Everywhere I walk, I'm just finding vapes and like kids' playgrounds and stuff like that. And I think for your middle schooler, what's really scary is even though most kids are just like the vast majority of kids aren't using substances, when they are, like this tiny percent that are, they're doing it in middle school and starting in middle school often, and they might be doing it visibly in the bathroom, and kids go in and they see people vaping and they're getting the secondhand smoke, and kids don't even know if they're vaping marijuana or nicotine. And what scares me about that is, well, several things, but one of the things that scares me is I've talked to so many middle and high schoolers who think it's actually like kind of normal that you might take a hit off a vape and pass right out because it's so strong. And they think that that's kind of like laughable. They don't understand that nothing should make you just pass out from from what it's doing to your brain just instantly. So those conversations are just huge. And Donna's commenting on her daughter's personality, who could be really influenced easily. Yeah, I think that's why we're always talking about like talk early, talk often. Just like Brooke said in the beginning. So I don't know if you're able to get the handbook from the chat, Donna, or anyone else, but there's the middle school version and the high school version with different information. And it's so important to talk to kids about this. But Donna, one thing I can tell you is with the Norwalk partnership, we did a survey this past October. We did one about 18 months prior. And it's so important to let kids know that most kids, I mean, by most, I mean, like even in high school, it's like 85% of kids by senior year in Norwalk are not using any kind of substance at all. So in middle school, if she starts seeing other kids using substances, she needs to understand that's like a tiny minority, because when you're in middle school, you want to do what you think is cool, and the cool kids aren't doing it. And you might have to really talk about like, how do you hang out with the friend group that's making good decisions, and what happens if some of your friends do other things, and does that mean you have to stay away from them, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think that's really important, that norming piece of not doing it. And I'll just say, with like I mentioned before, I've got a 6th grader now, so I've been asking a lot, like, what he knows about vaping. Do kids talk about it? Has he seen it? Kind of how he feels about it. If he has questions, stuff like that, and just continuing to leave that that door open for conversation, and to equip him to make healthy decisions, but also to be there if he has a friend who starts using and he's concerned,
Right.
Wants to be able to talk.
And having those skills to get out of a scary situation, because I think sometimes we don't expect our kids to get exposed to something as early as it happens, and then the kid's there and like maybe someone's using something or offering them something and they've never thought about what they would say. And in the moment, it's like this panic thing. And it's like, if we're all socialized to be polite, it's like, okay, I guess I say yes, because we never practiced. What could you do instead? How could you laugh it off? How could you go, my mom would kill me, I have to get to class, my coach would kill me. Like, what are your excuses to get out of there?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And Donna's pointing out how easy it is to, access vapes and everything everywhere. So Donna, and I know, anyone else here, please jump in verbally or in the chat with any questions or comments. Like Ben, you're, recent high school grad, and Deirdre, you've got kids at different ages. But I also know, Donna, you mentioned in the chat that you've got this 20-year-old in college. I was just talking to friends of mine who have a college, well, he just graduated from college, and he shares with them that he's been using marijuana pretty regularly. And I saw them recently and they were like, oh, our son just like basically used weed last night and had what he described as a horrible, horrible trip. Like, and he used the word trip, and he said it was just an awful experience. And he was completely, paranoid, and it was horrible. And he was really kind of like, the whole thing freaked him out, even though he'd been using weed, I guess, pretty regularly and sharing that with them. And what most impressed him was that he said something about it to all his friends. And one by one, they all kept saying, that happened to me, that happened to me, that happened to me. And he said, how come like everyone my age seems to think that marijuana is like now a normal thing to use in our 20s, and no one's saying, oh my God, it can be awful and it freaked me out. And because he said, I'm not doing this again. And then a bunch of his friends said, yeah, me neither. So he felt like it was like the best kept secret. So yeah. Deirdre or Ben or anyone else want to comment on anything, or anybody, any questions or comments? And are you all able to get that handbook? Because if you open it up and bookmark it or download it, it's great. And Donna, since you're in Norwalk and I work with the Norwalk Partnership, I also have hard copies, so I could get you a hard copy if you want that instead. You could tell me where to reach you in the chat.
Hi, Margaret.
Hey, Deirdre.
So my youngest just went off to a city school. So I think the difference between that
Deirdre, your voice disappeared.
Fraternity houses, big city school. The city school is going to having fake IDs and going to adult bars. So I was, I never thought much about what a city school would be, but it seems like they're going into bars right at the age of 19, which I didn't, that they didn't really realize that that's right away. They would skip over kind of the other type of younger, kind of normal kind of partying that I was familiar with. So it was interesting.
That's kind of scary, because I guess, Deirdre, you were probably thinking like, oh, there might be drinking at parties in dorms on campus, and then your kid can make their decision about doing it or not doing it, right? But now they're all like, let's go out to a club or a bar. Is that what you're?
Yeah, and that adds a whole nother, okay, so like she, of course, my daughter, so then it's like, well, you have adult men at these bars, and you just, it brings out a lot of other risky behaviors that can happen. So it's something I hadn't thought about before.
That's scary. So so Deirdre, how has that changed the conversation with, like, what are they saying about it? Are they like, I want to go, I don't want to go?
Yeah, but that's why I'm really glad that I made it to this training, because when I saw her during Christmas break, I think it was just like her first time she was away. So I think I was just sinking in some of her stories. now looking at it, I think this gives me an opportunity comes home over the summer to ask questions and to listen, because
Mhm.
this is a great food for thought.
Mhm. One thing I made a note of that I wanted to just mention in case everybody didn't know, but Brooke, when you had that slide in the beginning and you were talking about like that slide showing how the brain develops over time, I think you're right. I think like showing that to both kids and parents is important to go, this brain is not mature. And I know you really like emphasize how much that means like these brains are all the way along there. They're not ready to make good judgments and decisions.
Mhm.
But the other thing is that the data shows that substance use at those ages while the brain is development also literally affects the development of the brain. So it's not just that the kid's more likely to make poor decisions or take risks or be impulsive, right? But like, you know, it affects their learning, it affects their memory, like with weed, with cannabis, they can literally lose up to 8 IQ points. But with alcohol too, like it affects their ability to learn, and that's what they're supposed to be doing at that age. So
Right.
there's so many different ways to talk about it with the kids and be like, you could get injured, you could get hurt, you could affect your brain development. Yeah.
Yeah. And in our youth programs, we talk a lot about the social academic consequences, the legal financial consequences, and then the life-changing consequences, which is more like the physical
Yeah.
the body on the brain, on
Yeah.
your literal life, because you might lose it, things like that. So
Mhm.
I think, yeah, that really hits home. And I kind of asked them, like, what are some social academic consequences? What are some? Which is, it's nice to hear what they have to say. And they usually get it all right. Doesn't mean they don't participate in it, but they know what they are.
Right. Well, that story of the girl at the beginning, which is so sad. But like the fact that, you know, like that you're telling the story by her mom, right? That's her
Yeah.
mom's words. And
Yes.
like, and pointing out that like her daughter had sex, you know, before she was in 8th grade. I mean, it's like, that's one of those life consequences too, is like, there's unprotected sex, there's pregnancy, there's rape, there's sexual assault, all these things that can happen because, you know, including with like a girlfriend and a boyfriend, like, but you know, it's not consensual because everyone's drunk or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Just thinking about, you know, what Deirdre just mentioned before as well, you know, going off to school and going to some of these big cities, if you're going off campus, you know, it reminded me a little bit about, you know, when we screened, if they had known for the Staples seniors, and you know, one of the messages leaving that about, you know, watching out for friends and having these conversations with your friends, kind of knowing what everybody has in their system and having a safety plan, especially when you're kind of outside that, at least somewhat safe, you know, kind of closed loop campus network, you know, and just so that you're protected and you're watching out for one another. I think that's important.
Absolutely. We've added in a lot more about advocacy into our youth program too. Self-advocacy, advocating for your friends, advocating on social media, right? Like putting it out there that you support the minimum drinking age. You aren't going to use drugs under 21. You're not going to do this, or you're going to do this instead, to spin it more positive. Really seems to work too, right? Kids are always sharing what they believe in on social media. So we want them to share this because it's not necessarily something that I saw growing up. Even I'm 25, so the it was never like cool, you know what I mean, to do that. But you know that there's kids, a lot of kids who are like, yeah, that's not cool. I'm not going to do that. So just posting it on social media so that that other person knows, and now that other person knows, and now they all feel comfortable to kind of show it too, which is cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, and anytime there's any other questions about this topic too, and I mean, a lot of the questions are probably answered in the handbook because it is long, it's extensive, but not too long, you know, it's not too much. And you can kind of find your topic, what you want to look at, right? But yeah, if there's ever any questions, you can always email me, and I'll put it in the chat just in case.
And Donna and I in the chat are talking about how I can give her a hard copy of the book. So if anyone wants hard copies of these, we have them. Let us know. Brooke, I like how you updated the slideshow, and the slides look great, by the way.
Thank you.
So does anyone have any more comments or questions? I'm going to stop recording, I think, because.
Mhm.